The doomed mission, the Galactic Council chamber, was silent, a heavy silence that carried the weight of fear. In the center stood the squad of alien soldiers, each chosen from different worlds, each trained in war. They had been called together for a mission that none of them wanted to accept. For months, rumors had spread across the stars about this mission, rumors that no squad had ever returned from it alive. Some said it was cursed. Others whispered that it was beyond the power of any species to survive. The commander, a tall reptilian officer with scarred scales, spoke in a harsh voice. "This mission is certain death," he said, "but the council demands it." His eyes scanned the squad. They all looked away, their hearts heavy with dread. They knew this was not an order they could refuse. Those who disobeyed the council faced a punishment worse than death. At the back of the chamber stood a figure different from all the others. A human, smaller than most of the towering alien warriors. His armor looked plain, his weapons simple compared to the advanced gear of the squad. The moment the aliens saw him, whispers began to spread. "Why is there a human here?" one muttered. "They are weak. They will be the first to die," another hissed in anger. "This is madness. The council insults us by placing a fragile creature among us." But the commander raised a hand for silence. "This human volunteered," he said. His voice carried disbelief as well. "No other species steps forward, but he did, remember. This is the only volunteer the council received." The aliens stared at the human, their eyes filled with scorn and confusion. The human said nothing, his face calm, almost too calm, as if he already knew what awaited them. When the squad left the chamber, their transport ship waited. The corridors were filled with tension, the air thick with unspoken words. The aliens sharpened their blades, checked their rifles, and prepared for what they believed would be their final journey. Yet they could not stop glancing at the human. Some laughed cruelly, others ignored him, but all of them wondered why he walked with such steady steps. Inside the ship, the engines roared. The stars stretched into streaks of light as they entered faster than light travel. The commander gathered them in the briefing hall. A massive screen showed the target, an area deep inside hostile space known only as the Death Zone. It was a place where war machines vanished, where even drones failed to send back signals. "Our mission is simple," the commander said with grim sarcasm. "We go in, we destroy the source of the enemy's breeding grounds, and then we attempt to return." His tone made clear that survival was not expected. The aliens grumbled, one struck the wall with a fist, another muttered prayers to a forgotten god. Fear clung to them like shadows. Then the human spoke for the first time. His voice was steady, almost calm. "If no one has ever come back, then it means we are the first to try with open eyes," he said. "That makes us stronger than the ones who failed." The aliens stared. Some mocked him, calling his words foolish. Others grew silent, troubled by the strange courage in his tone. As the hours passed, the squad tried to ignore him. They ate, they sharpened weapons, they cursed the council, but the human sat alone, reviewing maps, checking supply packs, and writing notes on a small pad. He seemed focused, as if he carried a secret plan inside his mind. The others did not care. They were certain he would break first when the horrors came. Finally, the ship shook violently. They had arrived at the edge of the death zone. The viewing glass showed a dark expanse of twisted stars and burning debris. It looked like the graveyard of fleets. The silence of space was broken by strange signals. Echoes of battles long past, the commander ordered them to prepare. His voice cracked with tension, though he tried to hide it. As the squad armed themselves, the human tightened the straps of his plain armor. He checked his weapon once more, then looked at the others. "No matter what happens," he said, "stay close, follow orders, and never lose hope," the aliens sneered. Some laughed out loud. One shouted, "Hope will not save us from the death zone." The ship doors opened. The squad stepped into darkness. The air felt heavy, charged with an unseen power. Every instinct screamed danger. The alien soldiers shook with dread, but the human walked forward calmly, his boots striking the ground with certainty, his eyes scanning the shadows as if searching for something only he could see. And in that moment, though none of them admitted it, a question rose in every alien's mind. Why was this human not afraid? What did he know that they did not? The mission had begun, and already the squad realized something strange. Death might come for them all, but the human was not walking toward it blindly. He was walking as if he had already faced it before, the journey into the unknown. The ship moved deeper into the death zone, and the silence inside the transport grew heavier with every passing moment. Outside the viewing glass, the stars looked twisted, bent like broken reflections in a shattered mirror. There were wrecks of ancient warships drifting without power, their hulls torn open, their crews long dead, but their stories still echoing through the darkness. The aliens in the squad could feel it in their bones. This was not normal space. This was a graveyard of countless soldiers who had come before them, and now their own names would soon be carved into the same forgotten tomb. The commander paced along the steel floor of the transport, his eyes hard but his hands trembling slightly when he thought no one was watching. He had led many missions, but this one weighed on him differently. He could not ignore the sharp whispers of fear among his troops. Some whispered prayers, others cursed their fate, and a few sharpened their weapons as if polished steel would protect them from what awaited. In their hearts, they all believed the Council had sent them here to die, to buy time for others, and perhaps to hide a secret they dared not reveal. But among the voices of doubt, the human remained quiet. He sat in a corner, his head lowered, scribbling notes on the same small pad. His calmness unsettled the aliens. They did not understand how anyone could remain so steady while moving into the most cursed part of the galaxy. One alien finally shouted at him, "Why do you write, human? Do you think words will save you?" The human lifted his eyes, meeting the alien's gaze without fear. "Words remind me of what must be done," he said softly. "If I fall, others will know the path we took," the alien scoffed, but deep inside, something about the human's resolve felt unshakable. The deeper they traveled, the worse the environment became. Their scanners failed without warning, signals jammed by invisible interference. Machines that had worked perfectly before suddenly shut down, forcing the squad to rely only on their instincts and raw training. Alarms rang through the transport more than once as radiation storms struck them with waves of unseen fire. The hull creaked, groaned, and screamed as though the death zone itself wanted to crush them into dust. The aliens panicked each time, rushing to their stations, shouting over one another. But the human moved with calm precision, sealing hatches, checking systems by hand, and guiding them with clear commands when even the commander faltered. It was during one of these storms that doubt began to shift into something else. The aliens had always mocked the human, calling him fragile, weak, and unworthy to stand among warriors, but now, as the storm rattled the transport and shadows of debris struck the hull, it was the human who took charge. He ordered 2 aliens to seal the breaches with emergency foam. He dragged another soldier back to safety when they nearly floated into the void, and he strapped down supplies before the turbulence threw them around. His voice carried strength, not arrogance, and the others found themselves listening, even if they did not want to admit it. When the storm ended, the squad sat in silence, panting, shaking, and staring at the wreckage inside their transport. Supplies were broken, weapons damaged, and morale cracked. The commander finally spoke, his voice rough with shame. "We were trained for war, but he was the only one who held firm." The aliens looked at the human, who sat quietly drinking from a small flask of water. He seemed unfazed by what had just happened, as though he had lived through storms far worse. In that moment, the squad began to wonder, what kind of world breeds such resilience in a being so small compared to them? As the journey stretched on, their path took them through abandoned outposts built long ago by other species. Each station was silent, stripped bare, and filled with signs of battles lost. The aliens shivered when they passed through these halls, footsteps echoing like ghosts. Every shattered wall was a reminder that others had tried and failed. Yet in every ruin, the humans searched with careful eyes, salvaging scraps of material, power cells, and strange minerals. He repurposed them into tools, bandages, or even makeshift shields. To the squad, it looked like madness, But to the human it was survival by night cycle. As they rested in the cold shell of an abandoned station, the commander questioned him. "Why do you do these things, human? Do you think scraps and broken metal will fight what awaits us?" The human looked up from his work, his eyes steady. "I do these things because the galaxy calls this mission certain death, but I do not believe in certainty. There is always a way, always a chance. If we refuse to quit—" The commander said nothing, but his heart stirred with something he had not felt in years. Hope? The following day, the squad was forced to land their transport after another failure in its core systems. They set up camp on a barren moon within the death zone, the air thin and the surface cracked. The aliens grew restless, some arguing that they should abandon the mission and attempt to escape. Their voices rose with anger and fear, accusing the Council of betrayal. Others demanded they leave the human behind, calling him a distraction. But the human stood and spoke with calm words that cut through the chaos. "If you turn back now, you will die in fear. If you move forward with me, you might die with purpose. But at least we will have a chance to change something." The aliens fell silent, not because they agreed, but because they had no better answer. In their silence, they realized that the human did not speak like one who sought glory or survival. He spoke like someone who had already accepted death but still chose to fight. That was something none of them could deny. And so the journey continued. The death zone swallowed them deeper into its jaws, their ship crippled, their supplies broken, their spirits shaken, yet step by step, guided by the calm voice of a lone human, the squad pressed forward. Even as terror gripped their hearts, a small seed of doubt began to grow, not doubt in him, but doubt in the legend that no one could survive this place. Because if a single human could face the unknown without fear, perhaps, just perhaps, death was not as certain as the galaxy believed. The first attack, the barren moon, was silent when they landed, but silence in the death zone never lasted long. The squad moved carefully across the jagged rocks, weapons raised, eyes scanning the horizon. Every shadow seemed alive. Every gust of wind sounded like a warning. The ground itself felt unstable, cracking beneath their boots as if the planet resented their presence. The commander kept them in a tight formation, forcing discipline upon soldiers who already trembled inside. Yet the fear in their hearts was too heavy to hide. They knew something was watching them, waiting, and the knowledge ate at their nerves with every passing second. It came at first as a low vibration beneath their feet, a hum that grew into a tremor. Dust rose from the ground, pebbles danced across the surface, and before any of them could react, the earth split open and a monstrous form burst into the air. The creature was larger than any war machine they had ever seen. Its body plated with jagged armor, its limbs bristling with spines, its mouth opened into a scream that echoed across the moon. Not a sound of rage, but of hunger. It had been waiting in the soil, sensing their arrival long before they touched the surface, and now it came to feed. The squad panicked. Some fired their weapons wildly, plasma bolts lighting up the dust-choked air, but the beams scattered uselessly against the thick plates of the beast's hide. Others froze, unable to move as the monster charged. Its massive limbs crushed stone like it was sand. The commander shouted orders, his voice drowned out by the alien roars of terror around him. They had trained for war, but not for this. Not for something that no weapon could kill. The beast swept its arm across the formation, throwing two soldiers into the air like broken toys. Their screams ended when their bodies struck the ground with bone-shattering force. Another soldier tried to retreat, but the creature's maw snapped shut around him. Swallowing his armored body whole, the squad broke, their discipline collapsing in a single heartbeat. They scattered across the rocks, shouting, cursing, begging their gods to save them. The commander tried to rally them, but his own voice trembled with fear. In that chaos, it seemed certain the mission would end here, not even at the heart of the death zone, but on its very edge. Then the human moved. He did not run like the others. He did not fire useless shots into the armored plates. Instead, he darted across the battlefield with strange precision, his eyes fixed not on the creature's size but on its movement. He studied its rhythm, its weight, the way its legs dug into the soil before it leapt. His mind did not see a monster. It saw a pattern, a weakness hidden beneath all that terror. With a sudden shout, he drew its attention, throwing a flare into the air that burst into a blinding flash of light. The beast turned, its many eyes catching the spark, and for the first time, it shifted its charge toward him. The squad gasped in disbelief. They thought the human had lost his mind. No one baited such a thing willingly, but he ran with determination. Weaving between the shattered rocks, forcing the creature to chase him, it lunged, claws tearing the ground where he had stood a moment before. Again and again it tried to crush him, but each time he slipped away, his movements faster and sharper than anyone expected. He led it toward a ridge, climbing higher and higher until he stood at the edge. The monster followed, its bulk shaking the very cliff apart as it pursued him. At the top, the human turned. His weapon was useless against its armor, but his eyes locked on the exposed joints beneath its neck. He had seen it when the creature roared, just for a breath. The soft tissue hidden beneath scales, he leapt forward, driving a sharpened piece of scavenged metal into that gap with all the force his body could muster. The beast screamed, thrashing violently. The wound was small compared to its size, but it was enough. Its body convulsed, its balance broken, and with one last desperate roar, it toppled backward off the ridge, crashing into the rocks below with a thunder that shook the moon itself. Silence followed, broken only by the harsh breaths of the surviving soldiers. Dust rose in thick waves, hiding the fallen monster from view. The aliens gathered slowly, their bodies trembling, their minds unable to grasp what had just happened. They had lost 3 of their own, and they had fired thousands of shots. Yet it was the human, with no advanced weapon and no fear, who had brought the beast down. They stared at him with wide eyes, some with awe, others with disbelief, but all of them knowing one truth: without him, they would already be dead. The commander stepped forward, his voice rough. "How did you do that?" he demanded. The human wiped blood from his brow, his expression calm despite the chaos around him. "It was not invincible," he said. "Nothing is. You only have to look closer." His words were simple, but they carried a weight the squad could not ignore. The galaxy had told them this mission was certain death. Yet in this moment, with the impossible lying broken beneath the cliff, doubt crept into their hearts. Perhaps death was not as certain as they had believed. But the human did not celebrate. He stood in silence, staring at the ridge where the beast had fallen. His eyes narrowed, his mind calculating. He knew this was not the end. If such a creature lurked at the edge of the death zone, then what horrors would they face at its heart? He tightened the straps of his armor, adjusted the blade, still stained with alien blood, and whispered to himself words the others could not hear. The squad thought they had survived the worst. But in truth, this was only the first test. The death zone had noticed them now, and its true darkness was yet to come. Trust tested in blood. The squad marched onward after the fall of the beast, their armor dented, their weapons scorched, and their spirits torn between fear and disbelief. The loss of their comrades weighed heavily on them, yet none could deny that they were alive only because of the human. The death zone was a place where legend said no warrior could endure, but the small figure walking ahead of them had stood against an enemy larger than anything they had ever seen. Still breathing, still calm, his presence began to gnaw at the walls of arrogance many of them had built around their hearts. As they traveled deeper into the cursed lands, the air thickened with toxins invisible to the eye. Breathing grew harder, lungs burned, and alien soldiers coughed until blood touched their lips. Their advanced gear was supposed to filter such poisons, but even the most sophisticated systems faltered here. The death zone was designed by nature itself to crush intruders. Panic began to spread again as soldiers tore at their masks, crying out that they would suffocate before reaching their goal. In that chaos, the human knelt down, ripping apart one of the ruined filters and pulling strange fibrous moss from the rocks around them. He pressed the moss into a damp cloth, tying it over his own face, then handed more to the others. "Breathe through this," he said firmly. His voice cut through their panic like a blade. At first, the aliens mocked him, saying his primitive method was pointless, But one desperate soldier followed his instructions. In seconds, the burning sensation eased, and the alien's breath grew steady. Others quickly followed, fear outweighing pride. To their shock, the simple cloth and moss kept them alive when their advanced machines had failed. For the first time, the squad looked at the human not as a fragile liability, but as someone who understood survival in a way they could not. The death zone had claimed many before, but this lone human walked through it with eyes that seemed to see solutions where others saw only death. Days blurred together as they pushed deeper, food and water running scarce, exhaustion carving hollow shadows into their faces. In those long nights, as storms of fire and lightning raged across the skies, the human became more than a soldier. He became their guide. He showed them how to ration their supplies, how to set traps for scavenger beasts, how to purify water from foul pools by boiling it with heated stones. He even taught them how to stay silent and still when predators prowled nearby. Their commanders had filled their heads with tactics and formations, but the human showed them something greater, how to endure when everything seemed impossible. Yet trust did not come easily. Some still doubted him, especially the commander. In his heart, he could not accept that a human, a species the galaxy dismissed as young and reckless, could succeed where countless empires had failed. He watched the human carefully, waiting for him to stumble, waiting for the mask of calm to break, but it never did. Instead, the human pushed forward with steady steps, always watching, always thinking, always ready to sacrifice his own safety to protect the squad. And though the commander resisted the thought, a spark of respect began to form. One night, as the squad rested in a broken cave lit by the faint glow of alien fungi, disaster struck again. A hidden swarm of razor-winged creatures poured from the cracks above, their bodies like shards of metal, their wings slicing through the air with deadly precision. The first soldier never had time to scream before his chest was torn open, blood spraying across the walls. Panic erupted instantly, soldiers firing wildly, their beams scattering off the swarm without effect. The creatures were too many, too fast, and death filled the cave like a flood. The human acted without hesitation, grabbing a burning branch from the fire and waving it wildly. The swarm shrieked and recoiled at the sudden light and heat. The aliens froze in shock as he drove the creatures back with nothing more than fire, shouting for the others to bring fuel. Together, they hurled broken supplies and cloth into the flames, feeding the fire until it roared bright and hot. The swarm screeched and fled into the darkness, leaving behind silence broken only by the cries of the wounded. The cost had been terrible. 3 more soldiers lay dead, their bodies torn apart. The survivors sat in silence, trembling and broken. They had seen death before, but never like this. The commander bowed his head, shame flooding him as he realized that once again it was the human who had saved them, not with advanced technology or powerful weapons, but with instinct and courage that refused to break. After tending to the wounded with strips of cloth and strange herbs the human had collected, he sat quietly by the fire, his eyes distant. The commander finally approached, his pride heavy. "Why do you keep saving us?" he asked in a low voice. "We mocked you. We doubted you. Yet you bleed for us as if we were your own." The human looked up slowly, his face shadowed by the fire. "Because survival is not about pride or strength," he said. "It is about trust. If one of us falls, we all fall. If one of us stands, then we all stand. That is the only way to defeat death." Those words settled into the commander's heart like a stone dropped into still water, rippling outward until the squad felt its weight too. They had begun this mission as a group of strangers bound only by orders, but slowly, painfully, through blood and loss, the human was binding them into something stronger. He was turning them into a unit not of convenience, but of survival. Still, doubt lingered in the shadows. The commander told himself that if the mission grew worse, if the death zone revealed its true horrors, he might still abandon the human to save the rest. He did not say it aloud, but the thought remained like a knife hidden in his mind. Yet, as he watched the human tending to wounds that were not his own, he wondered if such betrayal would even matter. because the truth was becoming clear. The squad might not survive without him, and as the fire burned low and the survivors fell into uneasy sleep, the human sat awake, listening to the distant roars echoing across the land. His hands rested on his weapon, his eyes fixed on the horizon. He knew more blood would be spilled before the mission ended. He knew trust was fragile and at any moment it could break. But he also knew this. When the next test came, he would be ready. The heart of the death zone. The squad pressed forward, leaving behind the cave where blood had stained the ground and fire had saved their lives. Their numbers had thinned, their bodies were scarred, and their morale was fractured. But something unspoken now bound them together. The death zone had already claimed more lives than they wished to count. Yet against every expectation, they still moved deeper, guided not by their commander's orders but by the quiet determination of the lone human who walked at their side. As they advanced, the landscape around them twisted into something no words could truly describe. The air shimmered with waves of toxic heat. The ground cracked open into endless chasms, and rivers of molten rock snaked through valleys where the bones of fallen titans lay. The sky thundered with storms of fire that rained down without mercy, and the very earth trembled as if the world itself was alive and enraged by their presence. No alien had ever seen the true heart of the death zone before, and now they understood why. It was not simply a battlefield. It was a place built to erase hope itself. The commander's voice shook when he finally admitted what none had dared to speak aloud. "We will not survive this," he whispered. His eyes scanned the terrain, despair clouding his face. "The Council sent us here to die, and we are fools for believing we could succeed." Several soldiers lowered their heads, ready to accept his words. The weight of exhaustion pressed down on them, crushing their will. Some muttered about turning back, even if it meant wandering blindly into death. But the human stepped forward, his voice steady, his eyes burning with something no storm could put out. "You think survival is impossible because you are looking at the size of the enemy," he said. "But you are not looking at the size of your will. This place wants us to surrender. That is its power. But if we keep moving, if we keep fighting, then the death zone cannot claim us." His words struck the squad like thunder. They had mocked him once, but now, in this place where their faith crumbled, they listened. They listened because he was the only one who had never faltered, the only one who refused to kneel to despair. Their journey brought them at last to a colossal cavern, a wound carved into the earth itself. The air pulsed with heat, and the ground shook with each vibration that came from deep below. At the center of the cavern, a hive sprawled like a nightmare made flesh. Towers of bone-like structures rose into the sky, glowing with a sickly green light, and swarms of winged creatures moved in endless circles above it. From the cracks within those towers came roars that rattled their very bones. The truth struck them with brutal clarity. This was not simply a nest. It was a factory of war, a place where monsters were born to flood across the galaxy. The squad stared in silence, dread tightening around their hearts. They had been sent to destroy this, but standing before it, the task felt more impossible than ever. The commander's hands shook as he gripped his rifle, his voice cracked as he said, "This is suicide, even if we destroy part of it. The swarm will tear us apart before we escape." The others muttered in agreement, their bodies already bracing for failure. But the human's gaze never wavered. His eyes traced the cavern walls, the flows of molten rock, the unstable towers glowing with unstable energy. He was not seeing despair. He was seeing opportunity. He turned to the squad, his voice quiet but filled with fire. "We are not here to win a battle," he said. "We are here to end a war. If we destroy the heart of this hive, we do not need to escape with glory. We only need to escape with purpose, and if death comes, then we die knowing the galaxy will live." His words shook them, not with fear, but with something else. The aliens looked at one another and saw the reflection of his determination. For the first time, they did not feel like they were following a doomed order from the Council. They felt like they were following a leader. The human laid out a plan, pointing to the unstable towers. "Those spires are unstable if we plant charges there. The collapse will trigger a chain reaction. The lava below will consume the hive. The commander frowned. Doubtful, but the logic was undeniable. The squad nodded reluctantly, their fear still heavy but now anchored by something stronger than despair. The possibility of victory. As they prepared their weapons and explosives, a distant rumble shook the cavern. The swarm above stirred, thousands of creatures shrieking in unison as if they could sense the intruder's intent. The air filled with the beating of countless wings, darkening the sky like a storm of blades. The squad tightened their grips, knowing that the moment they moved, the swarm would fall upon them. It was not a question of whether they would fight. It was a question of how long they could survive. The commander looked at the human one last time, his pride finally broken. "You lead us now," he said, his voice heavy with both fear and respect. "If this is to be our end, then let it be under your command." The human nodded, his face grim but unwavering. He did not celebrate the trust given to him, because he knew what it meant. It meant their lives now depended on his every decision, and failure would mean not only their deaths but the deaths of billions beyond this cursed world. The squad moved into position, planting charges, preparing defenses, and steadying their weapons as the sound of the swarm grew deafening. Their hearts pounded, their hands shook, but for the first time since the mission began, they no longer looked at the human with doubt. They looked at him with the desperate hope of soldiers who had already accepted death but longed for one final chance to change destiny. The human raised his weapon, his voice steady even as the cavern trembled with the coming storm. "We do not fight for ourselves," he said. "We fight for every life beyond this place. We fight to prove that death is not certain, not while we still breathe." The words cut through the noise, filling the squad with a fire they thought they had lost forever. And then, with the roar of wings descending upon them, the battle for the heart of the death zone began, the human's sacrifice. The cavern shook with the thunder of wings as the swarm descended, a living storm of claws and teeth that blotted out the glow of the hive towers. The air became a whirlwind of shrieks and shadows, the sound so loud it rattled their bones. The squad braced themselves behind the jagged rocks, firing their weapons in desperate bursts. Beams of plasma lit the darkness, cutting through dozens of the creatures. But for every one that fell, 100 more came shrieking down. The swarm moved like a tide, endless and merciless. The human did not hesitate. He shouted orders with clarity, his voice steady where others quaked. "Hold your ground. Focus your fire. Do not waste shots. Aim for the wings. Bring them down." The aliens obeyed almost without thought. Their training had prepared them to follow their commander, but now their instincts trusted the human more. In the chaos, it was his voice that anchored them, his calm that gave them a reason not to collapse. The first wave of beasts smashed against their line, bodies crashing into shields and weapons. The air filled with the stench of burning flesh as the aliens fired with all their strength. Yet even as the swarm fell in heaps, the numbers never seemed to shrink. In the middle of the storm, the human fought like a creature born for war. He moved faster than the eye could follow, ducking beneath claws, rolling past snapping jaws, driving his blade into weak joints and tearing open flesh where armor gave way. His weapon hummed with fury, but it was his courage that truly carved a path. Again and again he threw himself into danger, dragging soldiers out from under falling bodies, shielding them from death with nothing but his own strength. Blood coated his armor, his breath came in heavy bursts, but his eyes burned with the same fire that had carried them through every horror before. Explosions rocked the cavern as the squad planted charges on the spires. Each blast shook the hive, cracks spreading across its glowing surface. The monsters screamed in fury as if the hive itself felt pain. The ground split, molten rock spilling like rivers of fire. Yet the more damage they caused, the fiercer the swarm became. They were not simply fighting beasts, they were fighting the will of the hive itself, a mindless hunger that refused to let them escape. The commander shouted, "We cannot hold. They are too many." Fear crept into his voice. He fired until his weapon overheated, throwing it aside in frustration. It was then that the human saw what had to be done. His eyes scanned the cavern. landing on a network of tunnels that burrowed beneath the hive, unstable and cracking under the strain of the battle. If they collapsed, they would bury the swarm and the hive together. The risk was unbearable, but it was the only way. He turned to the squad, his voice hard. "The charges will not be enough. We must bring the tunnels down. I will draw the swarm, lead them into the weak ground. When the tunnels collapse, the hive will fall with them." The squad froze. Realizing what he meant, one alien shook his head violently, shouting, "You will not survive that. It is suicide." But the human only smiled faintly. "I told you before, survival is not certain. But purpose is, if I fall, let it be because I chose to end this war." Before they could stop him, he sprinted forward into the heart of the swarm, his body a blur of motion as he leapt from rock to rock, swinging his blade and firing his weapon with ruthless precision. The swarm turned on him instantly, their endless hunger drawn to the lone figure daring to challenge them. The aliens shouted in horror, firing to cover him, but he was already beyond their reach. His path was madness, yet there was no hesitation in his steps. He lured the monsters into the tunnels. Weaving through falling stone and rivers of molten rock, the creatures pursued, their screeches filling the air as they poured after him in endless waves. The human moved with desperate speed, every movement tearing his body, every strike carving through muscle and bone. But he never slowed, never stopped. His blood painted the rocks, but his will drove him forward. From above, the squad watched helplessly, their hearts breaking as they realized he was sacrificing himself for them. For the galaxy, for all life beyond this cursed world. The commander's voice cracked with emotion he had long buried. "No soldier, no warrior has ever fought like this," he whispered. His eyes burned with shame and awe. At last, the human reached the heart of the tunnels, the ground already trembling under the weight of the swarm. With his final strength, he pulled the last of his explosives from his belt. Pressing them into the unstable stone, he looked up one final time, his gaze calm. His lips moved as he whispered words only he could hear. "For all of them, this is enough." The charges exploded. The tunnels roared as they collapsed, stone, fire, and molten rivers swallowed the swarm in a wave of destruction. The cavern above shook violently, the hive spires cracking, splitting, and finally collapsing into the fiery chasm below. The swarm screamed in unison before their voices were silenced forever. The squad barely escaped the blast, throwing themselves behind rocks as the entire hive crumbled. When the dust cleared, the cavern was a ruin of fire and stone. The hive was gone, the swarm destroyed, but the human was nowhere to be seen. Only his weapon lay at the edge of the shattered ground, glowing faintly in the heat. The squad gathered around it in silence, their breaths heavy, their hearts filled with grief. They had mocked him, doubted him, even hated him, but in the end, he had become the reason they lived. The commander fell to one knee. Picking up the blood-stained blade, his voice shook as he spoke. He was one human, and he did what no empire could. He changed everything. The squad bowed their heads, and in that moment, every soldier swore they would never forget the sacrifice that had been made. But deep in the shadows of the ruins, unseen by them, a faint figure moved, bloodied but alive. His steps were weak, his body broken, but his will refused to die. The galaxy believed humans fragile. Yet here, at the very heart of death, one human had stood unbroken. The legend born. The cavern burned for hours after the collapse, molten rivers carving new scars into the earth as smoke rose into the poisoned sky. The squad stood in silence at the edge of the ruin, their bodies battered, their weapons ruined, their minds still struggling to accept what had just happened. They had seen the impossible, an entire hive consumed, a swarm wiped out in a single desperate act. Yet, as they stared at the ruins, their grief pressed heavier than their victory, for in their hearts they believed the human was gone, swallowed by the very destruction he had created. The commander held the human's blood-stained weapon tightly in his claws, his scaled hands trembling. He was a soldier who had fought countless wars, but never had he felt such weight on his chest. We mocked him, doubted him, And yet he gave everything to save us, he whispered. His voice cracked, the words catching in his throat. No warrior in our history has shown such strength. Not one. The others lowered their heads, some weeping openly, others too broken to speak. For the first time in memory, a squad of hardened alien soldiers mourned not for their own kind, but for the loss of one human. They turned away, limping back through the cracked terrain, dragging their wounded with them. Every step felt heavier than the last. Each soldier carried not just their injuries, but the weight of a story they knew they must tell. When they reached their transport, the commander gave the order to leave the death zone behind. Yet, even as the engines roared to life, a part of them remained in that cavern, buried with the man who had turned certain death into survival. The journey back to the Galactic Council was long and silent when they finally arrived. The chamber where they had once stood in dread now felt different. They marched forward not as broken survivors, but as messengers of something greater. The council members leaned forward in disbelief as the commander placed the human's weapon on the floor. His voice echoed through the hall, steady and unflinching. We were sent to die, yet one human gave us life. He destroyed the hive, he ended the swarm. He saved not only us, but countless worlds beyond. He was the reason this mission succeeded. The council chamber erupted in gasps and murmurs. For generations, humans had been seen as reckless, fragile, and insignificant compared to the great powers of the galaxy. Yet here was proof that one human had achieved what entire fleets had failed to do. Some council members tried to dismiss it as luck, others as exaggeration. But the survivors stepped forward one by one. Each soldier spoke of the human's courage, his guidance, his sacrifice, and his unshakable will. Their words carried weight no politics could silence, and the chamber grew quiet as the truth became undeniable. Whispers spread across the galaxy, carried on transmissions, encoded in reports, passed from soldier to soldier. The tale grew into something larger than life. They called him the human who defied death, the lone warrior who had walked into the jaws of the death zone and returned with victory. Species who had never spoken of humans with respect now uttered his name with awe. Others feared it, for if one human could change the fate of a mission deemed impossible, then what would happen if all of humanity rose together? But the story did not end there. Weeks later, as the squad recovered in silence, rumors reached them of a lone figure seen wandering the outer edges of a burned world, broken but alive. At first they dismissed it as a tale born from grief. Yet the commander could not let go of the hope burning in his chest. And when one evening a shadow appeared at their camp, limping, scarred, his armor shattered but his eyes still burning with the same unshakable fire, they knew the truth. The human had survived. He had clawed his way out from beneath stone and fire. His body bore the marks of countless wounds, but his spirit had not yielded. When the squad rushed to him, voices filled with disbelief and relief, he only smiled faintly. "I told you nothing is certain, not even death," he said. His words carried the same quiet strength that had guided them through their darkest hours. From that moment he was no longer just a soldier, no longer just one human among many. He was a legend. The story of his defiance spread farther and faster than the council could contain. His name was etched into songs, into prayers, into the fearful whispers of enemies who now understood that humanity was not to be dismissed. For in a galaxy where death was seen as inevitable, one human had proven that will and courage could break even the most unbreakable fate. The squad who had once mocked him now stood proudly at his side, their loyalty unshakable. They had seen what he was, not just a man but a symbol, a reminder that even in the darkest places, light could still burn. The commander himself declared that the galaxy had witnessed not just survival, but the birth of a legend that would echo through ages. And so, the tale of the doomed mission became the tale of the lone human who changed everything. A story carried across stars, told in hushed voices and loud songs, repeated in barracks and on battlefields. It was no longer the story of death, but the story of defiance. And at its heart stood a single truth. Humanity had faced certain death, and humanity had refused to fall.